That name isn't derogatory to an Indian nation. I'd say get rid of it. Hi guys, my name is Kiefer Ordaz and this is Tanner Clark. We're going to be discussing the rebranding respect, the how, the when, and the why of the Washington Commanders. The game plan for this presentation is going to be the origin of the conflict, the tension around cultural present representation, which is the conflict, the concepts, mediation, and the conclusion. The origin of conflict for about 82 years or so, the NFL Washington football team has been known as the Redskins. The name and the logo has been celebrated for their three Super Bowl wins, but it was heavily criticized because it was objectifying Native Americans. This topic resulted in protests and acknowledgement of how symbols are always changing. Tradition should not always prevail, but even if it does, it may be difficult to change things up. Moving over to the conflict portion, tensions over cultural representation. The conflict surrounding Washington's drama mainly involved the franchise, the fans, and different Native Americans and their tribes, also their sponsors. Native activists filed lawsuits claiming that the name violated proper cultural representation. According to the Washingtonian, roughly half the Native American population was against the name, but a small percentage felt the name represented the team's history, while the rest felt indifferent about it. I have a little clip here for you. All right, moving on. The controversy became more mainstream in the last 15 years, especially as cultural sensitivity began to heighten. Public protests began, and the Redskins sponsors, mainly FedEx and Nike, tried to force owner Dan Snyder's hand by threatening to disassociate themselves from the team if action wasn't taken soon. And this wasn't just these two major conglomerates. This was Walmart. This is anybody who was willing to sell anything that had the merchandise name Redskins on it. Snyder stated that he, under no circumstances, would change the name of the team. However, as tensions heightened, this no longer seemed reasonable. I have another clip for you guys as well. All right, and that's the bottom line. So we now have conflict with the people of the nation, the activists who are requesting and protesting. And then also, now you look in the major sports world, this is a subject that is not going to go unturned and people are going to talk about it. All right, so now we're moving forward. We have another radical event that happens, another death in 2020, the death of George Floyd. The Redskins' name was under even more scrutiny, and Snyder was under immense pressure to make a change. The financial tension forced Dan Snyder to eventually pull the plug on the name and temporarily rebranded itself the Washington Football Team. And after this, they're coming up. We're trying to make a change, but these things take time. I'm going to pass it on over to Tanner, and he's going to go over some concepts for you.
Perfect. So some of the concepts that I found that were pretty can be seen pretty frequently throughout this whole conflict were the identity negotiation theory, which can be seen through the Native Americans as they believed that rejecting the Redskins name and logo, allowing which would help to assert their dominance by standing up for what that they thought they were standing up for, what they thought what they should be believing in, and by not standing by and allowing their culture to be misrepresented. And then another concept that I kept noticing was power dynamics and how Native Americans have been advocating for change, for name change for decades, but their voices were deemed insignificant to a big NFL franchise. And it took, like Kiefer had already said, a bunch of corporate sponsors like Walmart, but particularly FedEx, who it was only when they decided that they wanted to help pull the plug, that's when Dan Snyder decided that he didn't want that he would change the name after previously stating that he would never change it. Another concept was cultural sensitivity, and advocates viewed the change was long overdue and respect for Native Americans. And these people felt that retiring the name meant leaving racial discrimination in the rearview mirror. And then tradition is a final concept that I noticed. The traditionalists hated change, and it felt like it like forced if the forced nature of the name change infringed upon the freedom of expression. And they felt that this change was buying into a modern day cancel culture and represented America becoming more soft. And then for mediation and what the Washington football team and the Commanders ended up doing about it. First, the team publicly came out and admitted that their former name could be perceived as offensive, specifically in the eyes of Native Americans. And the franchise needed to engage with all of its fans, including Native Americans and its sponsors. A constant line of communication made their fans feel included, which was crucial since they felt like their voice wasn't heard throughout this entire ordeal. And they ended up allowing the fans to potentially vote on a future name, which was completely unheard of at the time for professional sports. Next, officially retiring the Redskins name despite not even having an official new name set up yet showed both the fans and the sponsors that the franchise was serious about this commitment, that they weren't going to go back on their word. And this last piece of the puzzle to finally mediate the conflict was to settle on a new name. And they ended up having, as I mentioned, a vote, and they picked a name that represented inclusivity and respect, which is pretty much a polar opposite, like a 180 of what the Redskins name stood for. For the main decision that would improve or worsen this situation, in my opinion, would be how they interact with Native Americans in the future. Because if they just decided that as soon as they change their name to the Commanders, they're no longer going to communicate with Native Americans and actively learn and listen, then it just kind of makes them incredible. Their credibility is just shot. If they choose to keep listening and learning about the Native American culture, it shows genuine and a caring demeanor, which is positive for all parties, whether that be Native Americans, sponsors, fans, or the team itself. Active engagement with stakeholders, not even just Native Americans, could be a good communication strategy, and focusing on the future and shifting away from the past is another communication strategy we think could pay dividends. Just because we don't want the future fans, younger fans specifically, to be focusing on all the negative aspects of their team's culture with the Redskins logo. They want to leave that in the past and focus more on the Commanders and inclusivity. And finally, in conclusion, this conflict taught us a lot about cultural sensitivity and how it has and will continue to shape the way people think. Intercultural communication is essential in helping us understand how different cultures perceive different symbols, such as a team's potentially could be perceived as bigoted name. We also learned how identity negotiation theory was important to both sides of this conflict, as they both fought for what was important to them, whether it be their heritage or just plain convenience. Both parties tried to negotiate the upper hand, which is something we see in most conflicts. Another aspect about intercultural communication we learned through this conflict was power dynamics, particularly how the Native American voice didn't matter until sponsors came in about for them. Finally, we also learned about how important communication is in conflict resolution, because if the commanders had changed their name but never spoke about it publicly, all their credibility goes out the window. Communication with all parties involved is what allowed the commanders to gain the trust of fans and to make sure those around them knew the franchise was trying to do right by them. I think you're muted, Kiefer.
Totally. Yeah, great. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Yeah, thanks again, guys.
So, I'm gonna turn this thing off.